Through the mists comes forth RPGaDay! In the year 2021, RPGaDay comes back for its 8th year. A time in August when every day we tackle another question or topic by answering in a way that uplifts the gaming community and answers questions people might have about this crazy hobby of ours that serves to build the community and bring it up, that many of us make blogs about, video blogs, art, or great works. In celebration of the community of gamers, I welcome you to RPGaDay 2021. Hello my friends and welcome to RPGaDay 2021. I am Rob the Dungeon Tutor, sometimes also Omnisci, and today is the 27th of August, which is the 27th day of RPGaDay, and we're getting close to being done. But today the word is fraction, which kind of got me excited because when I first read it, I read faction, and I think there's a lot that can be talked about with the word faction. We're going to play straight up, though. Fraction. Generally, role-playing games try to be simple these days. People don't have a lot of patience with math. They want to enjoy the game, not do math. I remember the memetic Calvin and Hobbes, where his mom is talking about it, adding up all the things to fight a dragon, and Calvin goes, "This isn't fighting dragons, this is math!" I felt like that with 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons sometimes. But, more to the point, fractions don't come up very often in role-playing games these days. Sometimes you'll get a half here and a half there, which can often be just a decimal point if you're going to do other attributive math beyond that. Honestly, fractions scare people. The operations that you do with fractions to do anything with them can oftentimes be suboptimal for what people want to do in a game, which makes sense, I suppose. I don't think I'd like to see games that go down to 30 seconds and, 40/5 of something. That's just not where I like to see a game go. But there are avenues where fractions, as in a part of something larger, have come into play. Not often, but they have. One example that I can give, you can use this as a scenario if you like. Way back in time, back when I was in college, didn't have the beard. We were playing a game, 2nd edition Dungeons & Dragons. We had a cleric in our group. He was a cleric of the water god. God of oceans and streams and lakes and stuff. It was a relatively simple pantheon that didn't divide up a god of lakes, a god of streams, a god of ponds, so on. Water god. Boom. So our culture mashed up against another culture. This was problematic because they already had their own water god. Similar portfolio. And a war broke out between our two cultures. Not an overt war, but it was a shadow war as different people tried to preserve the dominance of their particular beliefs. And our circumstance wasn't really much different. Our friend, our teammate, is a cleric, and eventually got powerful enough to be effectively the high priest if he wasn't running around and adventuring. If he just sat still, flexed his power that, yeah, I can raise people from the dead. Yeah, I can, do all of this. You're the high priest. Almost anywhere you go to, the high priest would look at you and go, whoa, you're bigger than me. If you're willing to stay here and tend to the flock and I'll be your subordinate, or I'll go found another church or something, but if you want this one, it's yours, chief. Well, he never settled down until after the campaign, so we were still adventuring, crusading adventurers, but at the same time, we didn't like the idea that this upstart god, who was a god, actually she was a goddess, she was a rank higher, she was a intermediate god, whereas our friend was following someone who was considered a lesser deity. And when we were confronted with that, the fact that theirs was more powerful, we kind of asked, what would it take to put ours up to the level of theirs? And the DM said, well, divinity levels are based on the widespreadness of their beliefs. So if you convert the people and defeat the followers, convert them or slay them, their stock will wane, yours will rise, and you would attain supremacy. Okay, we can do this. So we basically declared a crusade against this water goddess. I honestly, to this day, don't even know if she was particularly evil. She wasn't. Ours was good. Theirs was more neutral-ish. I remember that, but I don't know if they were particularly evil. But what we did definitely could qualify as evil under the venue we were having a crusade. We deliberately went through and looted their temples. And we did fight against several of their priests and put several of them to the sword. If you took a step back, we might not have been the good guys in that scenario. But the DM was keeping track of all of the different things that we did. And he would proselytize to the people. He would try to draw people to his faith, talking about the advantages of his particular god, which offered all of the benefits and none of the baggage. Ours is good and doesn't want to see people drown or see droughts and withhold their blessings from the people if they don't give him what they have. No, ours will keep making sure the water flows and that you live a comfortable life and are healthier because you're getting the water, who is a direct blessing from our deity. And over time, the length of a campaign, eventually the stock of the goddess, she dropped down to lower. Ours moved back, dropped down to lesser. Then ours moved up to intermediary. We were winning, quite clearly. We actually were getting hunted by members of their faith, if I remember right, which we mopped up. We were very skilled. This was a rather high-level campaign. We had 2 magic users. That might be all you need to say, really. The higher level was an air elementalist, and the lightning spells went thick and fast. And I was playing as a generalist with a taste for making things blow up. I had a very diverse selection of stuff, but we would frequently have contests to see who could make the bigger spell effect. Even with chain lightning and stuff, we would compete, even though he had an advantage on me, just for fun. I, on the other hand, came up with the most broken combination that I've ever seen a DM allow, which was to cast 3 Abu Dalzim's Horrid Witherings, a nasty 7th level spell that would suck the moisture out of a person, which is ironic. And I also would have the chain spell cast. The trigger for it was me casting another Abu Dalzim's Horrid Withering. So basically I would cast 3 spells on a set point. And I first cast the chain spells, which basically put those into storage. So those spells were hanging around me just waiting to be triggered. And I set the trigger that I cast another Abu Dalzim's Horrid Withering in front of me. So when I would cast it, I would make sure that the targets were right there where I cast those 3 those 3 Abu Dalzim's Horrid Witherings. And then I would cast an Abu Dalzim's Horrid Withering on that spot, and they would get 4 of them in a row. 4 of some of the deadliest spells in the game with doing direct damage. I believe by that time I was doing something like 25 8-sided dice of damage not easily sloughed off or ignored, because that really wasn't as much of a thing in second edition. That affected everything we found and was absolutely deadly to water elementals. As it turns out, avatars of the water goddess. And boom, 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 boom. It was the most devastating magic that I've ever pulled off in any D&D game. It was thoroughly broken, and I shouldn't have been allowed to do it, but I did. By this time, we were taking on avatars and restructuring entire pantheons. But it was all a fraction game. It was figuring out over the pool of all these people who have a vested interest in revering water. Who are you going to go to? Are you going to go to her, who started out pretty powerful, but she's kind of mean. She kind of, she also governs people drowning and not coming to a good end. And if you don't appease her, she withholds her blessings. Or do you follow him? He's nice and he wants you to be well and he'll keep giving you his blessings. You don't have to necessarily give him your donations and everything, but if you think a kind thought every now and then and don't pay attention to her, we're good. And of course, by that approach, he ended up getting us, well, the faith super rich and powerful. So it all worked out in the end. And it was by taking that fraction over. Like, a pie chart, watching our pie take up bigger and bigger chunk until it overwhelmed and eclipsed her following. We started at like a third of the pie and eventually got to about 80%. Capstoned off by destroying her avatars. So she was basically kicked out of the world. She had just a small cult following after that point. I think she was even reduced down to a minor deity. Whereas ours got the profile of a greater deity as kind of a reward in the denouement at the end of the campaign. So it was interesting, and it was an interesting way to work a fraction as a game mechanic. But I'm sure there's plenty of other ways to do that. So it's something that you can use in your toolbox, having something that is kind of like a tug of war over a fraction of a greater whole. And certainly if you're thinking about very successful adventurers, for instance, that actually helps with other macro decisions like economy. For instance, when a group, I wasn't in this particular group, but they were telling me they were playing in an adventure, and if you've played the adventure, you know what I'm talking about, where there was a literal river of liquid gold, molten gold, a river of it, a continuous flow of gold. There were a ton of things in this dungeon level that were completely full, they were made of gold. Everything was made out of solid freaking gold. To the point where it was really kind of shocking that they would have pitchforks with golden heads and forks and spoons made out of gold, which is a terrible substance for gold because it would bend and not very good, but that's what they had was gold, so they made stuff out of gold. When they got to the river, they're like, wow, there's all this liquid gold. So they would sluice it off, cool it enough so that it wouldn't damage the apparatus, and they filled up their portable hole with all of this solid molten gold that was no longer molten. So it didn't destroy the portable hole. A portable hole holds a cylinder 10 feet across and 10 feet deep. Completely fill that with gold. Take it out of the dungeon. How much of the area's economy do you think now rests in the player's portable hole as far as available gold in the area? The players didn't think about this, but the dungeon master certainly did. So once the players had, say, 2/3 of the functioning gold, eclipsing what the governments had to spend, they could buy anything they wanted until they started buying what they wanted. Because the moment they flooded the market with all of this gold, gold became worthless. Eventually, electrum became more valuable than gold because there wasn't as much of it in circulation. They put so much of this gold into the economy, they devalued gold to the level of copper. Didn't break their hearts too badly, but boy, there were angry people. Anybody whose reserves, their foundation built on gold, was rendered practically worthless. And it was just a function of the fact that the world wasn't thoroughly realized, that the government didn't step in and stop their limitless supply of gold from destroying the economy. But that didn't happen, and they kept on going, and they just turned their attention to the next dungeon, which wasn't quite as broken for the economy, but was still pretty crazy. So yeah, that's another idea of how fractions work in the economy. If all of a sudden you have a pie representing all the gold, and you suddenly cram in a foreign amount of this substance, it suddenly turns into a pie chart. Depending on how much of the foreign substance there is, the original one shrinks to just a pie slice. And if that's the case, then the total value is going to change, and what you had originally as the value is going to completely fluctuate and devalue. So just something to think about. That's what I think about when I think of fractions. So thanks for joining me on this little journey throughout history and economy and thoughts of things that aren't necessarily exciting to gaming, but still something decent to consider. Hopefully you found this interesting. And if you did, feel free, if you got rosy feelings for me and you just stumbled on this video, like and subscribe. I appreciate it. And of course, if you have an idea of how fractions worked for you, like say you have a critical hit table that talks about what fraction of a person's body you cut off, sure, leave it in the comments below. I'd love to hear it, and we can talk about that. But until next time, and there will be a next time because there are still videos out to make, I am Rob the Dungeon Tutor, sometimes Omnisci, and I'm very glad that you joined me. Thank you again, and until that next time, which I hope you come back for more, farewell.